UK's next Prime Minister, I'll tackle executive pay. She defended its record on tackling the budget deficit and on reviving the economy after the global financial crisis. Britain's next Prime Minister is promising to get tough on irresponsible big business, and ease up on austerity. Who will succeed David Cameron as UK leader on Wednesday, says last month's vote to leave the European Union was also a demand for an economy that doesn't just work for the 1%. The 1%. We need to make sure our economy works for everyone, because it is apparent to anybody who is in touch with the real world that people do not feel it works that way at all, she said in a speech Monday. May said she would give workers and consumers, as well as shareholders, representation on the boards of big companies. An annual shareholder votes on executive pay at big companies would be binding, not just advisory. There is an unhealthy and growing gap between what these companies pay their workers and what they pay their bosses, she said. The Conservative politician has been a senior member of Cameron's government for 6 years. She defended its record on tackling the budget deficit and on reviving the economy after the global financial crisis. The UK economy has been one of the strongest in the developed world in recent years, enjoying faster growth than other G7 members. It also created millions of jobs. Unemployment fell to 5% in June, its lowest since 2005. And while income inequality has also fallen slightly since 2007, it remains way above levels seen in the early 1980s. Real wages have stagnated, and housing costs, prices and rents have soared. Too many people still feel as if they're missing out, May said, and that was reflected in the Brexit vote on June 23. A poll of 12,369 people carried out that day suggested professionals and managers backed staying in the EU, while unskilled workers and the unemployed voted to leave. That poll, and a separate survey by YouGov, found that graduates were likely to vote Remain, while those whose education ended at high school were likely to back Brexit. There is a growing divide between a more prosperous older generation and a struggling younger generation, May said. And there is a gaping chasm between wealthy London and the rest of the country. Related, London pays UK bills, but for how much longer? Announcing her candidacy to succeed Cameron 2 weeks ago, May signalled a retreat from years of austerity that some have blamed for widening the divisions in British society. She said Britain should borrow more to avoid new tax hikes. Days later, Treasury Chief George Osborne abandoned his target to deliver a budget surplus by 2020. The most recent British Social Attitudes survey found that Britain is deeply divided along class lines, and that the recent period of austerity has affected how people view society. We are less likely now to think it possible to move between social classes than in the past, reflecting, perhaps, the fact that social mobility is not what it once was, the authors wrote. May did not talk about tax rises or spending cuts on Monday, but set out specific proposals for tackling what she called irresponsible behavior in big business. Company boards were often failing to hold senior management teams to account because the non-executive directors are often drawn from the same social and professional circles. If I'm Prime Minister, we're going to change that, she said. Worker representation on big company boards is long established in some European countries, notably Germany, where it has been credited with reducing labor disputes and helping it succeed as a manufacturing powerhouse. In addition to forcing binding annual shareholder votes on pay, May said she wanted companies to publish detailed bonus targets and the ratio between the CEO's pay and what the average company worker makes. The backlash over big pay deals has grown this year, with investors questioning the discrepancy between lower returns and rising salaries. They're also worried by the growing gap between average pay and salaries at the top. The Executive Remuneration Working Group, set up by the Investment Association last year, has described the current approach to executive pay in UK-listed companies as not fit for purpose. A group representing small shareholders said earlier this year that annual bonuses for the CEOs of Britain's biggest companies should be capped at 100% of salary, compared to the 200% currently common. Brexit will increase UK's huge debt. This is the Brexit Britain envisioned by UK Treasury Chief George Osborne, who on Friday abandoned long-held plans to produce a budget surplus by 2020. We will continue to be tough on the deficit, but we must be realistic about achieving a surplus by the end of this decade, Chancellor of the Exchequer Osborne said. Osborne warned earlier this week that more austerity would be needed following a shock decision by British voters to leave the European Union. Tax hikes and spending cuts are both on the way, he said. The referendum result is as expected likely to lead to a significant negative shock for the British economy, he reiterated Friday. How we respond will determine the impact on people's jobs and on economic growth. Osborne warned ahead of the vote that an emergency budget would be needed to fill a black hole of about £30 billion, $42.6 billion, per year if the UK left the EU. Critics dismissed the warning, and accused the Treasury official of running a campaign based on fear. In the wake of the Brexit referendum, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which provides independent analysis to government, cancelled plans to issue new economic forecasts this month. It won't give a judgment on the fiscal fallout of the vote until the fall. But bank economists have already slashed growth forecasts for this year, and next. Some predict a recession. On Monday, Standard & Poor's and Fitch Ratings both downgraded the UK's credit rating. The weaker credit rating could make it harder and more expensive for the UK to borrow money and finance its debts. The UK has the second highest budget deficit in the G7 after Japan. And gross government debt is already £1.7 trillion, $2.24 trillion, or 90% of GDP. Theresa May, the leading candidate to succeed David Cameron as Prime Minister, said that the government should borrow more in an attempt to avoid raising taxes. We should no longer seek to reach a budget surplus by the end of the Parliament, May said, a speech announcing her candidacy. Fiscal stimulus is likely to be preceded by monetary stimulus from the Bank of England. Governor Mark Carney said the bank's forecast that there would be a significant slowdown in growth in the event of a vote to leave the European Union was likely to come true. Does anyone in the country think that these risks have not begun to manifest? He told reporters on Thursday. In my view, the economic outlook has deteriorated and some monetary policy easing will likely be required over the summer. The pound fell by 1.5% to $1.32, not far above the 31-year low hit in the immediate aftermath of last Thursday's EU referendum. The total loss since last Thursday is about 12%. Many independent forecasters have already slashed their forecasts for the world's fifth biggest economy for this year and next. The UK's credit rating has been cut. Some are even predicting recession, as the uncertainty about Britain's future weighs on spending and investment by consumers and businesses. The sharp fall in the pound could help exporters, but it will push prices of imported goods and energy higher, leaving people with less money in their pockets. Carney said the central bank would make a preliminary assessment of the fallout on July 14, before considering how to respond in August. UK interest rates currently stand at a record low of 0.5%. The Bank of England could cut them further, or revive a program of quantitative easing, creating new electronic money to buy assets such as government bonds. The program was launched in January 2009, and the bank has already bought assets worth £375 billion, $495 billion. It hasn't raised the ceiling since July 2012. The asset purchases are designed to get more cash flowing through the economy. But Carney has just one vote on the bank's Monetary Policy Committee. Whether it responds quickly to the Brexit threat will depend on the views of the other 8 members. leader on Wednesday, says last month's vote to leave the European Union was also a demand for an economy that doesn't just work for the 1%. The 1%. We need to make sure our economy works for everyone, because it is apparent to anybody who is in touch with the real world that people do not feel UK's next Prime Minister, I'll tackle executive pay. She defended its record on tackling the budget deficit and on reviving the economy after the global financial crisis. Britain's next Prime Minister is promising to get tough on irresponsible big business, and ease up on austerity. Who will succeed David Cameron as UK? It works that way at all, she said in a speech Monday. May said she would give workers and consumers, as well as shareholders, representation on the boards of big companies. An annual shareholder votes on executive pay at big companies would be binding, not just advisory. There is an unhealthy and growing gap between what these companies pay their workers and what they pay their bosses, she said. The Conservative politician has been a senior member of Cameron's government for 6 years. She defended its record on tackling the budget deficit and on reviving the